thank you to Square Enix for sponsoring today's video. With the PC version of Final Fantasy XVI out, and as a result of more people getting into the game, I thought now was the perfect time to make an extensive video about the combat. The combat in Final Fantasy XVI is drastically different than anything the series has seen thus far. For so many years, Square Enix has been trying to perfect an action formula. While none of them take the risk and go pure action like Final Fantasy XVI, they've all tried to mix in real-time gameplay in some way. But for some reason, that implementation has always felt lackluster in comparison to other areas in those previous Final Fantasies, such as their deep progression systems and RPG elements. But I do believe that Final Fantasy XVI is really the first game in the series with action combat that absolutely dominates and feels fully realized. The combat is tight and very well made, and for me personally, it's the best action gameplay a Final Fantasy has ever felt and ever looked. Although Rebirth just came out this year, and while I'm someone who personally prefers that they go pure action or pure turn-based as opposed to a hybrid RPG, Rebirth does perfect that formula extremely well. But the combat here all makes sense when you realize that the combat director for Final Fantasy XVI was the designer for the gameplay of Devil May Cry 5. As many of you know, it isn't the deepest when it comes to progression or RPG elements. It all becomes glaringly obvious that a lot of their focus was really in just perfecting the action combat to the best of their ability. And that's what we have here. Since the game has been out, I've really been diving deep into the combat, experimenting with just how crazy you can get with mixing in combos and becoming as stylish as possible while also dealing optimal damage. And after multiple playthroughs of this game over the past year, I've come to realize that this combat system really is designed in a way where everyone can play. But it is deep enough to where you can really experiment and play at a high level. So I thought that with the release of the PC version, I can teach you just how stylish and creative you can really get with this combat. Even though the combat system is great, you can't truly have a Final Fantasy without a compelling world and a story to go with it. Final Fantasy XVI is a world set in Valisthea, a land divided into multiple realms, each governed by powerful nations that rely on mother crystals. This is a source of magic and energy that people simply cannot live without, and these nations within Valisthea will fight over this dwindling resource. Within the story, you play as Clive Rosfield, the main protagonist of the story, driven by a quest for vengeance and searching for his role in the world. It's a story that delves deep into the themes of power, revenge, freedom, and the burden of destiny. Clive's quest to find the man who wronged him will lead into a truly cinematic journey you do not want to miss. The characters are deeply developed, with Clive's arc showcasing his growth from an Imperial soldier seeking vengeance to a figure seeking freedom for him and those he fights for. Take control of the iconic might within Clive and battle iconic summon beasts from previous Final Fantasy games, which I gotta say are some of the most intense and hype moments you will ever have in any video game. This is a game that harkens back to a more traditional Final Fantasy setting, while also providing a fresh and creative battle system that anybody of any skill level can pick up and play. So if you haven't already, check out the demo and consider purchasing the full game at $49.99 or $69.99 for the complete edition. And all I'll say is that from the first 2 hours alone, you will not regret your decision. So the link is in the description. Go play Final Fantasy XVI now. Final Fantasy XVI's combat is all about player expression, and I will always say to anybody who wants to get good at the combat that you get as much as you put in, meaning that if you just spam and then cooldown dump the entire game, then you may not have as much of a fun time than if you actually experimented with your kit to bring out the most in the combat. While the game doesn't force you to combo or anything like that, even though I think it should, I still recommend that you at least experiment with the combo nature of 16, as I think it is one of the most satisfying ways to play this game, and it's a combat system that is specifically built for people to experiment and go wild. So it came to absolutely no surprise that when I actually started practicing in the training area that my love for the combat just clicked, and I became more addicted than I ever thought I was going to be with the gameplay alone. And there are many ways to approach the combat, as there's really no limit to what you can use and what icon abilities you can pair together. Now, the first tip I would suggest to everybody, and it's pretty simple, is to get used to always magic bursting. I have seen so many people play this game mashing square and not realizing that they should be magic bursting as much as possible. Think of it kind of like Nero's rev mechanic in Devil May Cry, but in the case of 16, you were doing it a lot more. Now, the game does give you a simple tutorial on this, but I think it does such a poor job of actually explaining what Magic Burst truly does, and how much you should be using it. Magic Burst is essentially a damage booster for both the enemy's health and the stagger bar, and though it may not seem like a lot, the damage really does add up in comparison to if you were just mashing square. And mixing in your abilities before these combos can end is a really good habit to get into. You want to make sure you're practicing the timing for Magic Burst combos, making sure you're doing it all of the time or as much as you can, as this is pretty much the basic combo you'll be using throughout the entire game. Though it doesn't stop there, because there is so much you can weave in between your magic bursts to add yet another layer of style to gameplay. As with any action game, you have your heavy attacks implemented to boost your overall damage, and also get creative with how you use them during battle. And it's no different in Final Fantasy XVI, because Burning Blade and Charge Shot essentially acts as the heavy attacks here, and the damage really does add up when using them. However, I see a lot of people who do not use these correctly, or they simply just neglect them because, I mean, yeah, they are pretty awkward to use at first, but it takes some finesse in order to implement them into your combos seamlessly. For Burning Blade and Charge Shot, you want to make sure you're charging them up right in the middle of an animation, whether it's during a magic burst, a phoenix dash, or really just any move that has pretty long animations. You want to get ready to add a Burning Blade or a Charge Shot to the combo during these moments. Once you get the timing down for this, you can get good at just freestyling and using these heavy attacks with pretty much any combo you choose to do. But for me personally, I like to use them when you're in the middle of an animation of any sort. It makes the transition to those heavy attacks a lot more seamless without having to awkwardly stop and charge it up. You can take it a step further and try this in the air, and even mixing in your abilities with that. Whether it's an iconic feat or an actual aerial ability, you can get very creative and stylish just exploring your different options. Point is, if you think you've maxed out on a combo and think that's all there is to it, you're probably wrong, because most people don't understand just how many things you can string together in this game. And it's not even just your abilities either. For instance, TORGAL is also an extremely underutilized tool in a lot of people's kits. What people end up trying to do with TORGAL is use him like a damage dealer and end up spamming Sick or Ravage. And I'm here to tell you, you are not using him correctly. TORGAL is pretty much good to use for starting combos, finishing combos, or extending your combos, resulting in a precision attack from TORGAL, and thus dealing a bit more damage as well. When you start getting comfortable with your own moveset and playstyle, try implementing TORGAL in various ways that I mentioned, as you'll really be surprised at the different ways you can utilize him. Another useful tip is to remember to use your abilities in tandem with a combo. And you may be asking, well, what do you mean by that? What I mean is that the average player will see abilities and base attacks as two separate things. You want to remove that barrier of thinking. So instead of cooldown dumping whenever abilities are ready, then being left with none at your disposal, try using an ability only when you're in a combo or when you're coming out of one. Take my example here. You don't really see me using many abilities without being in a combo first. In general, it's always good to practice variation. In fact, you should get in the habit of doing so, because not only is it more stylish and interesting that way, if you want to play at a high level and dive into arcade mode, you'll be getting scored on your performance. So you'll want to make sure that you're actually switching things up and not just cooldown dumping all of the time. Now, when it comes to action games, my favorite thing to do is to always combo in the air. In Final Fantasy XVI, enemy step is going to be your best friend here. Again, like with a lot of tips I'm giving you, it's because people just tend to forget that you can do these things. And one of them is as simple as jumping. What ends up happening is people just end up staying on the ground, cooldown dumping, and doing your basic 4-hit combo. Don't forget that not only can you jump in this game, but you should be practicing enemy step as much as possible to extend your combos and pretty much dance around your enemy. And it's also worth mentioning that a certain accessory from the DLC will allow Clive to enemy step up to 6 times if upgraded. So the combo potential off of that alone goes a long way, and it's also one of my favorite accessories because of how game-changing it really is. And from one action game fan to another, make sure you are constantly cycling through your icons icons. Staying on one icon for too long isn't a good habit if you're trying to play stylish. You're also just limiting yourself at that point. Make sure to always cycle on your icons and use your iconic feats because a lot of them have a purpose. You just have to find them. Whether it's dashing towards your enemies with Phoenix, freezing your enemies with Shiva, or getting motivated with Odin, the possibilities are endless. And the combat is truly versatile, so why not experiment and really take your gameplay to the next level? So those are my biggest tips for anybody who wants to dive deeper into the combat and really just explore how many options this game gives you. The gameplay for Final Fantasy XVI may not be for everybody, and that's completely fine. But I wanted to make this video to show that there is a lot that you can do with the combat. And the versatility alone inspires so much creativity from the community that is always awesome to see. It's an easy pick up and play battle system that anyone can enjoy. But it's also deep enough to play at a high level and really master everything. So what are you guys waiting for? Get out there and be stylish.